They lit up the screen with elegance and mystery, but behind the fame were whispers, secret letters, deep friendships, and love that couldn't be named. In old Hollywood, loving the same sex meant risking everything. Some hid, others left quiet clues. These are the women whose lives raised questions studios never wanted asked. Watch closely and tell us, which truth do you think survived the silence? If you were trying to hide a queer woman in old Hollywood, Tallulah Bankhead was your worst nightmare. She smoked like a chimney, drank like a sailor, cursed like a trucker, and flirted with women like it was an Olympic sport. She wasn't just wild, she was wildfire, and studios could barely keep up. Born into Southern aristocracy, Tallulah had the kind of voice that could fill a room and the kind of secrets that filled entire gossip columns. She once said, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." That's not the brand image MGM was looking for. But what really made executives sweat wasn't her sass. It was her women. She was inseparable from Eva Le Gallienne, the icy stage actress known for her brilliance and quiet defiance. The two lived together, and while tabloids spun it as an artistic sisterhood, insiders knew better. Then came Mercedes de Acosta, the infamous poet whose love letters were practically weapons. Tallulah and Mercedes, they weren't just close, they were loud, dancing together, laughing too freely, radiating something Hollywood didn't have words for or permission for. Studio heads panicked. They gave her weak roles, tried to trap her in morality clauses, leaked rumors. At one point, an executive allegedly said, if she'd just shut up and kiss Clark Gable, we'd make her a queen. But Tallulah, she didn't shut up, she leaned in. When told she was ruining her reputation, she famously replied, "My dear, I don't have one left to ruin." She never used labels. She didn't need to. Her life was a walking protest sign against silence, shame, and the straight-washed dream machine of old Hollywood. Tallulah didn't just live on the edge, she was the edge. And while Hollywood tried to sand her down, erase her queerness, and sell her as a joke, she refused to disappear. So tell us, was Tallulah Bankhead too bold for her time, or exactly what queer women needed to see, even if Hollywood didn't? Some women break rules. Marlene Dietrich rewrote them, in silk gloves with a cigarette dangling from her lips. She wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous. Not in the way men feared, but in the way Hollywood did. Because Marlene didn't flirt with scandal, she made it wear heels. When she wore a tuxedo on screen in the 1930s, yes, a full tux, it wasn't just fashion, it was a warning shot. To men, to women, to every studio executive who still thought queerness could be hidden behind lipstick and soft lighting. Off-screen, she collected female lovers the way others collected pearls. Mercedes de Acosta, Claudette Colbert, Dolores Del Rio, sometimes one at a time, sometimes not. Her love life was a riddle, but a sexy, open-ended one. And yet, Hollywood kept her legend polished and hetero-friendly. Romance stories with leading men, whisper campaigns about European eccentricities. They figured if she never said the word lesbian, then maybe America would never ask. But the queer community knew. The way she looked at women, not like a rival, but a temptation. The way she kissed a woman on screen in Morocco, while dressed like a man, with no apology, no hesitation, and no studio denial. Dietrich was too clever to say it outright. She wrapped her queerness in perfume and metaphor. "I love without questioning gender," she once said, which, in 1940s Hollywood, was basically a pride flag. They tried to box her in, to turn her into another fantasy built for men. But Marlene had her own fantasy, and it didn't require permission. She became an icon, not because she fit in, but because she didn't even try. And for women watching in silence, closeted, coded, cautious, she was a signal, a secret wink from someone who understood. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes silence doesn't mean shame. Sometimes it's power, dressed in sequins and defiance. And sometimes, just sometimes, that power looks like Marlene. She said it once, "I want to be alone." And for the rest of her life, Hollywood gave her that wish. Sort of. Greta Garbo didn't just vanish from fame. She withdrew, like a tide pulling back from the shore. but not before leaving behind waves of rumors, longing, and questions no studio dared answer. Her beauty was legendary, but it was her silence that made her mythic. She spoke little, trusted few, and never talked about her private life. And yet, the whispers wouldn't stop. For years, she was linked to Mercedes de Acosta. Yes, the same woman who lit fires in the hearts of half the actresses on this list. The two exchanged over 180 letters, some romantic, some aching, some angry. Garbo begged her not to publish them. Why? Because in those letters there was vulnerability. There was truth. And in 1940s America, truth could kill a career. She was also close to Louise Brooks, Salka Viertel, and even Mimi Polak, her schoolmate from Sweden, whose love letter Garbo kept for life. None of it was confirmed. But some truths don't need confirmation. They just hang in the air, like the space between two women in a photo, standing too close. MGM built her as the ultimate fantasy, the untouchable goddess, and they wanted to keep it that way. A queer Garbo? That would have broken the illusion. So they fed her roles of lonely women, tragic heroines, distant queens, always desired, never possessed. Because maybe deep down, they knew. That's who she really was. Garbo didn't fight the system. She simply refused to give it more than it deserved. No confessions, no red carpets, no tell-alls. She vanished into her New York apartment, walking the streets in sunglasses, hiding her legend in plain sight. And still, decades later, we wonder, was Greta Garbo really alone, or was she just protecting a love the world wasn't ready to see? Before the studios rose, before the stars had agents, before Hollywood had a code to silence, there was Alla Nazimova, an actress, a director, a producer, and quite possibly the most quietly radical woman the industry ever saw. Born in Russia and trained in theater, Nazimova brought fire to every stage she touched. But when she moved to Hollywood, she didn't just act. She built something. A mansion on Sunset Boulevard. She called it the Garden of Allah, and it became the most scandalous address in town. There were parties, endless parties, but not just for drinking or deals. They were for freedom, for actresses who loved other actresses, for writers, dancers, artists, anyone who didn't fit the mold of straight, white, and silent. She never labeled herself. She didn't have to, because the women in her life told the story for her. Mercedes de Acosta, Eva Le Gallienne, Dorothy Arzner, and a long list of roommates who shared more than just a lease. The press called it eccentric. The studios called it bad for business, but those inside the garden called it home. Out of fear and cleverness, she coined the term sewing circle to describe her circle of queer women in Hollywood. It sounded harmless, domestic. But in reality, it was a resistance, a soft rebellion against a system that would rather see them erased. Eventually, the studio system caught up. They cut her off, took away her funding, turned her from queen to outcast. And when the Garden of Allah was sold off, brick by brick, it wasn't just a house that disappeared. It was a safe haven for queerness in a town that had no place for it. But the legacy didn't vanish. It whispered through generations of closeted stars that once there was a woman who dared to make space, not for fame, not for men, but for love in all its forbidden forms. Some names are remembered for what they did on screen. Alla Nazimova should be remembered for what she built when the cameras stopped rolling. A home, a code, a sanctuary, long before Hollywood even knew it needed one. While others chased the camera, Eva Le Gallienne chased integrity. She wasn't a Hollywood girl, not in temperament, not in politics, and definitely not in love. She lived for the stage, not the screen, for art, not celebrity. And when it came to her heart, she made no apologies. Eva loved women, not in coded letters, not in whispers, but openly, dangerously, in a world that called such love perverse. She had affairs with some of the brightest stars of her era, Mercedes de Acosta, Tallulah Bankhead, Josephine Hutchinson. It wasn't gossip, it was fact, and the newspapers ran with it. One scandal almost ruined her. Hutchinson, an actress married to a man, was outed for her relationship with Eva. Headlines blared, studio contracts trembled, Eva refused to hide. Hollywood panicked. She was too open, too political, too much. They sent offers, but with conditions. Change your tone, play the game, lie a little. She said no, and then no again. Instead, she took to the stage like a warrior, not only performing, but founding her own theater, the Civic Repertory in New York, where she refused to cast based on market appeal or box office draw. She wanted truth, and she lived it, even when it cost her everything. Her rejection of the spotlight came with a price. Industry parties stopped inviting her. Critics called her difficult. But the queer women watching her from the shadows saw something else. A woman who didn't flinch, even when the world turned its back. In an era when most queer women played along or disappeared, Eva stood still, too proud to fake it, too brave to play straight. She never became a household name. She didn't care. She had her lovers, her books, her stage, and for once, that was enough. So when we look back on Hollywood's golden age, let's remember not just who shined the brightest, but who dared to burn without permission. She played tough, sharp-tongued femme fatales, gun-toting ranchers, hard women with soft hearts. On screen, Barbara Stanwyck was the kind of woman men feared and women admired. But off-screen, the questions never stopped. Was she really that cold to men or just uninterested? Barbara married actor Robert Taylor, MGM's golden boy. He was charming, handsome, straight from central casting. The problem? Most people believed it was a studio arrangement. Taylor loved the spotlight, Stanwyck loved her privacy, and their chemistry, better in promo photos than at home. Insiders whispered that MGM pushed the marriage to squash gay rumors about both of them. And in the 1940s, a studio-approved marriage was the best kind of alibi. For a while, it worked. Barbara became Mrs. Taylor. Glamorous, respectable. But when they divorced, the whispers came back. Louder, sharper, harder to contain. She was close, very close to her longtime secretary Helen Ferguson, who acted more like a partner than an employee. The two lived together for years, took vacations together, and were rarely seen apart. Helen handled Barbara's press, her money, even her schedule. Friends joked Helen ran her life, but no one dared ask how close they really were. Barbara never confirmed the rumors. She didn't have to, because in Hollywood, the absence of denial was its own scandal. Still, she was smart. She didn't rebel. She played the game, but on her terms. Never too open, never too emotional, always in control. She built her image like a fortress and dared anyone to question it. The press called her the Steel Magnolia, friends called her the Queen, and those who knew her best called her untouchable. Did she love women? Did she choose solitude over secrecy? Or did she sacrifice something private so she could stay powerful? Maybe that's the real story. Barbara Stanwyck didn't need to come out. She built a wall so strong, no one dared knock. And even now, we're left wondering what or who might have been on the other side. She played Endora, the sharp-tongued, perfectly coiffed mother-in-law from hell on Bewitched. And for millions of Americans, Agnes Moorehead was unforgettable. But long before television gave her Technicolor glory, she had already built a reputation, not just as a powerhouse actress, but as a woman who defied all boxes. She never remarried after her brief, failed marriage to actor John Griffith Lee. She never had children, and she never appeared with a man on her arm. Not at parties, not on red carpets, not even for studio deals. Whispers grew louder. She was too close to other women, too private, too odd. Some claim she had a long-term relationship with actress Debbie Reynolds' mother. Others said her truest companion was her female housekeeper, who lived with her for decades and was never far from her side, not even at work. The details were hazy, but the pattern consistent. Hollywood insiders even coined a term for women like her, the woman's woman. It sounded innocent enough, unless you knew what they really meant. Moorehead never responded to rumors. She simply kept working, commanding roles in Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, and Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. Always serious, always solo, always slightly out of reach. She was a devout Presbyterian, fiercely intelligent, and often described as eccentric. But maybe that was just code for doesn't play by our rules. She didn't flirt for headlines, didn't feed gossip columns. She built her name on presence, not performance. And maybe that's what unsettled people most. She didn't fit the mold. She didn't want to. When she died in 1974, she left behind no lovers, no scandal, and no apologies. Just a legacy of female characters who were powerful, complicated, and never defined by a man. So was she gay, queer, asexual, or just someone who refused to be anything but herself? Maybe that's the point. In a town obsessed with labels, Agnes Moorehead never gave anyone one. And somehow, that silence still echoes louder than words. She disappeared the same way she lived, mysteriously and on her own terms. Joan Crawford didn't rise to fame. She clawed her way there. One glare, one scandal, one broken heart at a time. On screen, she was a hurricane in heels, a woman with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass and a stare that made grown men flinch. But behind the gowns and the glamour, there was another story, one that Hollywood didn't want to talk about. Crawford's love life was tabloid gold. 4 marriages, endless flings with powerful men. But off the record, whispers of women. And not just any women, actresses, secretaries, socialites. She was rumored to have affairs with Barbara Stanwyck, Greta Garbo, and even Marilyn Monroe in Monroe's early years. Was it just gossip? Or was it a pattern the studios worked hard to bury? MGM, her longtime employer, knew how to spin stories. They pushed her into public romances, crafted photo ops, and carefully removed any suggestion she might prefer the company of women. Because in the 1930s and 40s, a lesbian leading lady? That was box office poison. But Crawford didn't play dumb. She was always 2 steps ahead and 5 steps removed. She used her charm like a blade and her silence like a shield. The women she was closest to often stayed in the shadows, live-in assistants, trusted stylists, former chorus girls who never left her orbit. She never confirmed anything. She didn't need to. In Joan's world, what wasn't said was more powerful than anything printed. Still, the image had to be maintained, every crack patched, every rumor redirected. And if she had to marry for appearances, so be it. She once said, "Love is a fire, but whether it is going to warm your heart or burn down your house, you can never tell." Maybe that's why she kept her matches hidden, because for all the headlines and husbands, Joan Crawford died alone. Her children estranged, her secrets intact. But for those watching closely, the message was clear. She wasn't just performing on screen, she was performing off it too. And maybe her fiercest role was surviving in a world that told her she could be anything, as long as it wasn't herself. She won an Oscar for It Happened One Night, the film that defined screwball comedy. But Claudette Colbert wasn't just clever on screen, she was calculated off it. She chose roles with precision. She controlled her image like a surgeon. And most of all, she protected her personal life like a secret vault. To the world, she was elegant, poised, maybe even a little aloof. But behind the curtain, Claudette Colbert's relationships raised eyebrows. Because for all her time in Hollywood, she was rarely seen with men. She married director Norman Foster, but they never lived together. He stayed in Los Angeles. She lived in New York. And their marriage? It lasted decades, mostly on paper. Meanwhile, she was inseparable from Verna Hull, a wealthy socialite. They traveled the world together, owned a secluded home in Barbados, and were spotted at dinner parties, Broadway openings, and charity galas, always side by side, always impeccably dressed, always just a little too perfect. The press called them companions. Hollywood called them eccentric. But insiders whispered something else entirely. Verna wasn't a publicist, not an agent. She wasn't helping Claudette's career. She was part of her life. And everyone who worked closely with Colbert knew not to ask questions. Still, Colbert never gave them an opening. She played it cool, cooler than anyone. No interviews about her love life, no scandal, no loose ends. She understood the system, and she beat it by playing invisible. Some call that loneliness, others call it brilliance. Because in an industry where being queer could end your career, Claudette Colbert stayed in the game and stayed herself. Was it love? Was it strategy? Or was it survival? Whatever it was, it worked. She retired wealthy, admired, unbothered, and left behind a story that even now refuses to speak its name. In the end, Claudette may not have shouted her truth, but she made sure no one else got to rewrite it. And as we close this chapter of Hidden Stories, we arrive at Kay Francis, the last on our list, but in many ways the boldest. She didn't just break the rules, she didn't acknowledge them. At her peak, Kay Francis was the highest paid actress at Warner Bros. She was statuesque, commanding, and always dressed like she owned the room, because honestly she often did. She played rich women with complicated hearts, but her most complicated role was always off-screen, being herself in a system built on lies. She married 3 men, each union more distant than the last. But while the headlines talked about husbands, her diary spoke volumes about women. She wrote candidly about her desires, her frustrations, her boredom with the game. She called herself a misfit in pearls, and no studio liked the sound of that. In private, Kay was linked romantically to multiple women, most notably Countess Edith d'Alencon, a stylish French aristocrat who appeared in her life like a shadow. They lived together for years, split properties, and were so deeply intertwined that even friends struggled to define their bond. Were they roommates, travel partners, or something no one dared print? But Kay never confirmed, never denied. She simply moved forward, unapologetically. She attended parties with women on her arm and didn't flinch when the whispers followed. She let the world wonder, and that, in 1940s Hollywood, was rebellion enough. And so, the industry punished her the way it knew best. They stopped casting her. They minimized her legacy. They made sure newer generations would know the name Bette Davis, but maybe not Kay Francis. Yet, she never begged for a comeback. She left quietly, lived privately, and died on her own terms, surrounded not by fanfare, but by those who truly knew her. Today, her films are rarely aired, her name rarely listed among the legends. But for anyone who digs deeper, Kay Francis stands tall as a coded icon, a woman who didn't need to come out because she never truly played along. And maybe that's the final truth. She didn't shout, she didn't hide, she simply refused to fit, and in doing so became unforgettable to those still searching for themselves. These women lit up the screen, but off-camera, they lived in silence. In a time when queerness meant scandal or exile, they loved in shadows, spoke in code, and built legacies Hollywood tried to erase. Some were bold, some were quiet. All of them paid a price for simply being different. Now we remember not just their beauty or talent, but the courage it took to survive a system built to keep them hidden. If one of their stories moved you, tell us in the comments. Which name do you think deserves to be remembered louder? And if you believe queer stories matter, like, subscribe, and keep uncovering the past with us. Because history didn't forget them. It was told to.